Curious how speaking up for what's right has become an act that causes a stir, unlike inaction, apathy, or ignorance.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in The Bad Batch, Episode 7.
And also Episode 8. Now, we're a little late getting this video up today because I didn't know that Disney was going to drop 2 episodes on the same day. But I loved both these episodes, and it's a pleasure to break them down for you. Thank you for your patience.
Wow. Now, this is the episode that is really kicking this show into high gear, and it starts to connect this show with the larger Star Wars universe. Now, I know some of you were getting frustrated that the show had so many one-off episodes, but I was glad to see them develop side characters from last season. For instance, Tech. I mean, this episode didn't even feature a single member of the Bad Batch, but it did set up a storyline where they are going to be pivotal. And I think we're about to see the Empire's final betrayal of the clones, and how we went from this...
I will create a grand army of the Republic.
...to this.
Help a veteran get a warm meal.
The episode is titled Clone Conspiracy, and it harkens back to great conspiracy thrillers like All the President's Men, which I'm going to talk about in just a bit. This episode is kind of a spiritual sequel to a great arc from the Clone Wars series, which was nicknamed Clone Conspiracy. So this arc was great if you ever wondered how the clones could just turn on a dime against the Jedi.
Oh wait, what happened in those episodes?
Okay, very brief recap of Clone Conspiracy because it sets up this episode. On a mission, a clone named Tup suddenly goes into a trance and says,
"Good soldiers follow orders."
Which, if you'll remember, was also Crosshair's response when Order 66 was activated back in the first episode.
Good soldiers follow orders.
Tup then killed Jedi Master Tup Lee and was sedated, so the Jedi never suspected that the clones were actually sleeper agents. They just assumed that the Separatists infected Tup with some kind of mind control virus. So Rex and Fives go with Tup back to Kamino for his examination. This is the episode where we first meet the Bad Batch's droid AZ-13.
Sorry.
Why? Ow! Hey!
I said I was sorry.
So Fives is quarantined in case he also has this theoretical virus. And the episode actually lays the foundation for the theme of the Bad Batch, which is the struggle for clones to find their own individuality and be more than just their programming.
No clone uses a number. Not anymore.
The Kaminoans claim that Tup has a tumor and not a virus, but of course all of us actually know that this was a premature activation of Order 66, which Palpatine ordered to be part of the clones' programming. Now, the Kaminoans believe that this contingency is in case the Jedi ever betray the Republic, so the Chancellor orders them to kill Tup so they can perform an autopsy on him. But before that happens, Fives removes the tumor and Tup leaves him with these haunting final words.
Oh, the nightmare. I'm free.
In Tup's final moments, he realizes that the clones were just pawns and that their mission is pointless. Then Fives discovers that the tumor was actually a control chip and that he has an identical chip inside his own head. So the government pretends to investigate this but frames Fives for trying to assassinate Palpatine. Rex tries to investigate but Fives is shot dead, giving Rex similar haunting words.
It's bigger than any of us.
And then, at the end of the Clone Wars, Rex tells Ahsoka about Fives, so she finds a way to override his command chip.
Find him. Find him. Fives.
Now Rex, last season, helped remove the Bad Batch's command chips, and we saw that he is starting to stage small-scale insurrections against the Empire. So the conspiracy in that Clone Wars arc was about Palpatine creating a contingency to kill the Jedi, and in this episode, it's about Palpatine using the destruction of Tipoca City to create a new cloneless Imperial military. So we open on Coruscant at night with the Republic Venator-class starship in the atmosphere, a neat way of reminding us that Palpatine's military is still the Republic military. The bar here is called 79s, and it first appeared in that same clone conspiracy arc that I just talked about. Also, fun Easter egg, in the show Rebels, Rex, Wolf, and Gregor used its logo to decorate their crawler cockpit right here. Now, the bar caters to clone troopers, but there are a couple professional Twi'lek women hanging around the inside and outside. The neon sign inside here reads 99. This is probably a tribute to Clone 99, the irregular who saved Kamino in an episode of the Clone Wars.
We lost a true soldier.
Afterwards, the Kaminoans started to create other irregular clones with specialities, and these were the Bad Batch, and that is why they are called Clone Force 99. So this sign is a neat tribute to an irregular clone who saved Tipoca City, and this episode is about the investigation of who destroyed that same city. So here we meet two clones named Slip and Cade who know a truth that the Empire is afraid of.
All those cities, all those people, gone. because of what we did.
Now, if you'll remember, Season 1 ended with the Empire essentially stripping Kamino for parts, killing most of the Kaminoans, and shipping others to work at Black Ops cloning sites. Rampart destroyed the city with the Bad Batch and Crosshair still inside. Now this season, we've already seen Rampart try to cover this information up. He kept Crosshair locked in a confinement cell for a long time and kept him off of going on missions, and he killed Captain Wilco for saying that he would report that Clone Force 99 was still alive. And now we see why there's so much secrecy. The Empire wanted to phase clones out of service because they're expensive and they wanted to fund the Death Star instead. But if they just would have stopped clone production, then the Senate would have taken the opportunity to phase out the military altogether. Remember, the Republic had no military before the Clone Wars, so the Empire has to maintain that the insurgents are a threat, but the clones are not an option, and then they can get funding for Palpatine's new military. This means that clones like Cade and Slip are potentially a threat to Palpatine's new empire. So Slip gets away from this assassin, and I love this small animation detail that in the wind his cap starts to fly off, but he puts it back on his head. We've come a long way since the first season of Clone Wars. And then we go to the Imperial Senate, which I know a lot of you hate politics in Star Wars.
Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics.
But I love politics in Star Wars. Give me a procedural committee vote in a galaxy far, far away any day.
You call this a diplomatic solution?
No, I call it aggressive negotiations.
Yeah, I didn't really get all that politics stuff.
Okay, so the Senate is debating Rampart's new funding bill, and notice how at this point in history, the Senate still does have some power. By the time we see them in Andor, it's a weak body that's lightly attended and mostly parrots what Palpatine wants to be said.
There is new public safety legislation.
But here, the Empire still needs the Senate to help maintain control of the government bureaucracy. As we saw in A New Hope, eventually Palpatine would dissolve the Senate to give his appointed governors full control.
Regional governors now have direct control over their territories.
This bill they're debating was also mentioned back in Episode 3 by the clones.
I heard the defense recruitment bill is up for a vote again.
The first rep says,
"The reality is that without the production of new clone troopers, we are vulnerable."
Which brings up the question, vulnerable from who? Palpatine needs a boogeyman in these early days of the Empire. Some group for people to fear because his empire, like the dark side, runs on fear.
Fear will keep the local systems in line.
And we see this attitude carried on even into the show Andor.
The Emperor's primary charge is to protect us, is it not? That's what the PORD legislation will do.
Now the next representative is from the Commerce Guild.
I concur with the Honourable Delegate of the Banking Clan.
Now this guild actually did join the Separatists along with the Banking Clan, the Techno Union, all those groups. Following the end of the Clone Wars, most of these guilds were disbanded and absorbed into the Empire. At least that's according to the new Essential Guide for Droids. Now it seems like this guild was given a voice in the Senate as long as they still supported Palpatine's policies. And, like most fascist states, they claim to be speaking for the people.
One comprised of the people who fight for the people.
But 3 senators voice opposition. Senator Pomlo, who has appeared in Star Wars before. She was an early founder of the rebellion, appearing in the novel Leia, Princess of Alderaan. And, like Mon Mothma, she was a member of the Senate while also a secret member of the Alliance to Restore the Republic. When we first saw her in Rogue One, she was trying to chicken out before the Battle of Scarif.
If the Empire has this kind of power, what chance do we have?
But she does serve up Jen's home run of a line.
You're asking us to invade an Imperial installation based on nothing but hope.
Rebellions are built on hope.
So by the time we meet her in Rogue One, she was kind of a scaredy cat stick in the mud. And here we see why. She spent years fighting Palpatine in the Senate and got nowhere.
The war is over!
Now this is actually a key moment in Star Wars. Imagine if this bill was defeated. Without clones, there would have been no strong military. And it's possible that the rebellion would have been organized and succeeded a decade earlier, and maybe even led by Jedi Knights like Yoda, Obi-Wan, Cal Kestis, and other survivors of Order 66, like Ahsoka Tano. And then Bail Organa steps up to the plate, and at this point, remember, he is already organizing the Rebel Alliance, recruiting people like Ahsoka Tano to join these insurgencies on the Outer Rim. He says,
"The deployment of the clone army was a result of the Emergency Powers Act."
And all of this is recounting the events of Attack of the Clones when Palpatine duped Jar Jar into creating galactic fascism.
Misa proposed that the Senate give immediately emergency powers to the Supreme Chancellor.
Now, Palpatine is not at the Senate for a couple reasons. One, if he attends the meetings, then it kind of lends them importance. See, by not attending, he's implying he has better things to do. And second reason, he's probably off training Vader how to be a Sith. Instead, his proxy is Vizier Masamada, who we first saw in the prequels, and eventually he did surrender to the New Republic in the Aftermath novels. Now, the main senator for this episode is a Pantoran named Chuchi, who appeared in a few Clone Wars episodes. First in Trespass, but then most notably in Sphere of Influence, when her planet was blockaded by the Trade Federation.
Ignore the Trade Federation's feeble attempt to paint this as a domestic financial issue and allow us to resume trade.
The Commerce Guild member notes the clone's accelerated aging, which I believe is twice as fast as a normal human. So, no matter what, the clock is ticking on the clone army. Now, I am glad that Chuchi was looking out for the welfare of their vets, which is a lesson that we can take away from the galaxy we currently live in today. She's trying to get the vets a pension, which actually might have worked. I mean, after all, Rex, Wolf, and Gregor were enjoying a nice retirement when we first met them in Rebels. But then again, there is the homeless vet from Obi-Wan, so like, who knows? Then Chuchi goes to 79's to talk to the soldiers, and the clones in the bar just want to obey their programming.
I can craft a pension plan.
Pension plan? I'd rather be out there fighting those insurgent groups that keep popping up.
I also like that just to show she's one of the guys, she's having a drink with the boys. And this is where we start to get into parallels with All the President's Men. Now, if you haven't seen it, this is a brilliant film that depicts the beginning of the Watergate investigation that brought down Richard Nixon. There are great moments like realizing your house is bugged and you're being followed, and most famously, the anonymous informer, Deep Throat.
Supposedly he's got a lawyer with $25,000 in a brown paper bag. Follow the money.
Except in this case, Slip spills the beans about Camino.
Camino wasn't destroyed by a storm. It was an attack ordered by Rampart himself,
leading Chuchi down a rabbit hole that almost gets her killed. Next, we go to the industrial area of Coruscant, where Darth Sidious was headquartered during the Clone Wars, and where Slip is calling Rex for help. Later, Rampart and Chuchi talk about the possibility of not even having a new military. But Rampart says,
I wish that were the case. But the murmurs of rising threats and insurgency are more than rumors.
Hey, who's he talking about anyways?
Well, the Outer Rim was the last part of the galaxy where there was still fighting in the Clone Wars. This is where the Separatists and the gangster syndicates like the Hutts are most powerful. So many of these planets never formally surrendered. We saw this on planet Desix in episode 3 this season, on the former Separatist capital Raxus last season, and also last season, Saw Gerrera started his decades-long guerrilla war against the Empire on planet Onderon. In fact, Saul does a great job summarizing these factions in Andor.
The Gorman Front, the Partisan Alliance, Sectorists, Human Cultists, Galaxy Partitionist.
As Chuchi leaves, we see the clone memorial wall from episode 3. Now this is a way to subtly remind her and us of what's at stake. The clones on that wall died to protect the Republic, and the least the victors can do is to protect the soldiers after the war. Then she goes off to another of the episode's Deep Throat-esque back alley meetings, this time with Bail Organa. Bail's droid is an astromech called R2-C4 who could have appeared in The Phantom Menace. That's the name of one of the droids who helped fight the Federation's blockade. So this episode pretty much shows Chuchi alternating between public and private meetings. In the public meeting, she sees the public face of things, the truth the Empire wants her to think. But privately, she learns about the Camino conspiracy.
Rampart is skilled at saying all the right things, especially when he doesn't want anyone looking deeper.
And then Bail tells her,
these insurgencies that have arisen, their numbers are growing.
And remember, Bail is behind funding a lot of these insurgencies. So I think that this is his way of trying to softly try to recruit Chuchi to be another member of the Rebel Alliance leadership.
If systems begin to revolt as they did with the Republic, that will threaten his new empire. It's rather convenient, wouldn't you say?
So Bail sets Chuchi off on Rampart's trail, which turns out to be really stupid because she's like the worst spy ever. She continuously forces Slip to stand in lighted areas as he tries to avoid her until he is finally assassinated. Thanks, Senator. The assassin pins her down in a boiler room that's straight out of Nightmare on Elm Street when she is saved by Captain Rex.
You all right, Senator?
Captain Rex?
And she knows him because they met before in the Clone Wars.
Good to see you, sir.
You okay, Rex?
It's just a scratch.
Now the assassin's mask is pressurized. Notice the hiss when it comes off. And we've seen this when Mandalorians and Darth Vader remove their helmets. So the reason they're like this with air pressure inside the mask is to prevent head trauma when they're hit. And also, at least in Vader's case, so they can breathe in space. At least according to the original designs by Ralph McLarty. Rex takes him to a garage and he says,
a couple of friends of mine own this garage. They're gone for a bit.
These friends are the Martez sisters, who Ahsoka met in Clone Wars Season 7. And last season of The Bad Batch, we saw that they were taking jobs with Rex to begin undermining the Empire.
It was a squad of rogue clones, and I know where to find them.
So the assassin clone refuses to give any information, and Rex says,
you're not wearing any identifiable markings.
I think that this clone is actually part of a secret Black Ops division that we have never seen before. Just before he commits suicide, he calls himself
a believer.
which sounds a lot like a Sith cultist. So this made me think, what if Sidious had other clones created that were loyal to the Sith? This would explain the abandoned off-site cloning facility that we saw last season.
And maybe, hey, remember in Rise of Skywalker? Remember all those guys in the stadium and they were like, blah, 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 blah.
Yes, I love that. We always wondered like where all those weird Sith cultists came from in Rise of Skywalker on Exegol. Maybe Palpatine grew them. I mean, heck, it's a better explanation than this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Now, I am psyched for this arc of the Clone Wars. I loved how this episode was a callback to other Bad Batch episodes, and it also shows the galaxy at a key time and place. So far, the best 2 episodes of this season haven't even featured the team that the show is named after. The Bad Batch are going to be key to shaping the events of the Galactic Civil War, and this arc will show us how.
Episode 8 is titled Truth and Consequences, and the title's meaning should be obvious. The Bad Batch do expose the truth about Rampart's attack, but the consequences are not what they expect. In fact, the consequences of the truth are simply more lies that serve the Emperor. It's a good lesson for the kids about how politics work. You can try your hardest to make the world a better place, but it's futile, and we should all live in a dictatorship.
Geez, that's harsh.
Yeah, I know, I'm kidding, but this is a tough lesson after the crowd-pleasing adventures we've had for the past few episodes. So we start off on the Bad Batch's headquarters on Ord Mantell, on their shuttle, and Omega is meditating. She learned this from Gungi, her Wookiee friend from episode 6. So when Omega says she's not meditating as well as Gungi, Echo says,
"He's a Jedi."
God, here's the thing, guys. I mean, if Omega is not Force sensitive at this point, then this is all just one giant fake out. She's a clone with a special ability, she's like intuitive with people, she's learned to meditate. I could see her and the team being in trouble in a future episode, and then she meditates and she like feels the Force accidentally. What do you think? Do you think she's Force sensitive? Let me know down in the comments. And Echo finally gets some attention in this episode. He's got one of the most compelling stories of all the Bad Batch. He was tortured and isolated for years, more machine now than man, and the show has largely ignored him. So of course, right before he leaves the team, we get to know him better.
I don't enjoy solitude. I had enough of that on Skako Minor.
And Skako Minor was the planet where the Bad Batch rescued him in Season 7 of the Clone Wars. Since this is Echo's last episode for a while, let's give him an Easter egg. The way his cybernetics are tied into his head is exactly like Lobot, Lando's companion that we met in The Empire Strikes Back. And in the comics, Lobot ends up with getting wires stuck in his head that look like dreadlocks. Also, Sibo in Star Wars Rebels had the same head interface. Rex calls to give the Bad Batch their new gig, and remember that at this point, Rex is basically going around the galaxy trying to liberate clones from Imperial rule. He's able to see that the clones were used and manipulated, so he's trying to free as many of them as possible. In the process, he's also an insurgent against the Empire, but I'm betting that once the clones are all dismissed from service, that he'll retire with Wolf and Gregor like we saw in Rebels. And remember, last season he also sent the Bad Batch on a similar mission to rescue Wolf from an Imperial detention cell. And of course, he also helped the Bad Batch remove their chips in one of the show's best episodes.
Good soldiers follow orders.
So when the Batch enter Coruscant, there's a Venator-class starship in the atmosphere as they fly through the capital skyscrapers and into the poorer lower regions. Remember, this is where Ahsoka Tano was riding her motorcycle just before she met the Martez sisters back in Clone Wars Season 7. When they meet Rex, Hunter says,
"Why are we here, Captain?"
And I like that he addressed him with his military rank as a way of deferring to his command on this mission. So we learned that the assassin's CT number has been erased and that this is unusual.
I was not aware that was possible.
Again, I think this guy was a Black Ops Sith cultist trooper, and I bet that we see more of them throughout the series. When Echo offers to testify about the destruction of Kamino, they dismiss the idea.
The Senate won't listen to any of us. We're deserters.
Which was smart, because otherwise the whole episode would have been about the Bad Batch just trying to testify, having their identities revealed, and then the show would have been way more boring. When they walk through the Senate hallways that we saw in the prequels, Omega asks the question that's on everyone's mind, regardless of what galaxy you live in.
Exactly does a senator do?
Okay, look, this is my mistake here. I thought they were trying to keep Omega a secret, but now she's like on space C-SPAN, so I guess they don't mind like having her existence known to the galaxy. Rampart meets with Masameda in the hallway, and I think it's interesting that he was even placed in charge of this vote to begin with. We saw his rise last season when he was first put in charge of the chain code implementation in the first couple episodes, and then he was put in charge of phasing out the clone army. I'm actually wondering if now we've seen the last of him, like maybe he'll escape custody and help form the rebellion, or maybe Palpatine will take him away to like be part of his Sith cult on Exegol. In the Senate, Omega asks why the clones have no representation, and Chuchi says,
"There are those who view clones only as military assets."
And I'm surprised that this ethical question never came up before. In Attack of the clones were talked about like they were just all identical drones.
They are totally obedient, taking any order without question.
But then the Clone Wars series showed that they developed individuality. So did the Senate like never think to ask if they were people?
Well, I mean, because of accelerated aging, they're all gonna be dead soon anyways.
Yeah, I guess, but the Senate was very preoccupied during the war, though. The intercom here is interesting. It's like the Empire is blaring propaganda to the people on the streets, which is straight out of novels like 1984 or Brave New World.
An assassin? It appears
It's also a subtle callback to George Lucas's first ode to the fight against fascism, THX 1138. In that movie, human servants are being constantly ordered around by faceless voices on an intercom. Also, Robert Duvall gets by a robot while he watches hologram porn. It's a weird movie that was actually an inspiration for the prison episodes of Andor. Chuchi finds an ally with her Senator Halle Bertoni, who we saw several times in the show Clone Wars.
The Kaminoans might have bartered their creation of the clones into a seat in the Galactic Senate.
The Senate gave the Kaminoans a seat in the Senate to advise on military matters, like in the episode Pursuit of Peace, when she introduced the new clone armor that later morphed into stormtrooper armor. Earlier, I talked about how these episodes are an ode to the movie All the President's Men, and they make that obvious when Bail Organa says,
"Follow the money,"
which is the most famous line from that movie.
Supposedly he's got a lawyer with $25,000 in a brown paper bag. Follow the money.
And also, there was an episode of News Radio where they said that the Star Wars trilogy was a metaphor for the Nixon administration.
Star Wars is a metaphor for the whole Nixon administration. I mean, that's fascinating.
I don't understand. Is that an Easter egg?
Nope, just a great episode of a great show. Moving on. So the big deal here is that funding for the clones was siphoned off to fund other projects, like the Death Star. The whole first arc of Season 1 was about the military ending its clone program, but apparently the Senate had to sign off on that first. Now, of course, we know that the money went toward projects like the Death Star, but the Senate later believes that Rampart could have stolen the money for his own personal fortune. It was a lot of fun to see the Bad Batch do like regular Black Ops missions, getting around ray shields, breaking into the bridge, and just improvising. We also get a callback to Wrecker's Fear of Heights, which we saw all the way back in the Clone Wars.
Hope nobody's scared of heights.
Well, I'm not scared of nothing. When I'm up real high, I got a problem with gravity.
Also, and I love pointing this out, the Bad Batch always uses the stun setting on clones. They never shoot to kill. Appropriate since this show has become about clone rights. And then Tech uses his new racing pod skills to pilot the escape pod.
So faster was one of those episodes. It mattered. Faster mattered. Darn it.
Doug, what's wrong?
Nothing. Just people hate that episode, and I just thought it was real fun. You know, like just a good fun episode of a cartoon, and then nothing wrong with that.
Right on. High five. During the vote for the recruitment bill, we see a couple familiar Star Wars species. Here is a Bith and a Godel later right here. Personally, I'm still waiting for the ETs to show up again like they did in The Phantom Menace. So when Chuchi is just about to win, Palpatine enters the chat. Now notice this fanfare sounds like alarms. A subtle way of saying that, hey, you should be scared of this guy.
Yeah, like how come the Senate doesn't know he's evil? Like he looks and sounds like really evil.
And the remaining Jedi will be hunted down and defeated.
Well, Doug, remember, in Episode 3, he blamed his voice and appearance change on the attempted Jedi coup.
The attempt on my life has left me scarred and deformed.
Palpatine expertly manipulates the Senate because, after all,
I am the Senate.
He blames the whole mess on Rampart and uses this as a reason to phase out clones.
The fact that the clones under his command so blindly followed orders, inflicting such carnage without hesitation, gives me pause.
Jeez, guys, are clones too obedient or not obedient enough? The clone troopers that arrest Rampart are clone shock troopers who made up the Coruscant Guard during the Clone Wars, and Yoda killed a bunch of them in Revenge of the Sith. And then Palpatine announces,
"We shall usher in a new era, heralded by the Imperial stormtrooper."
And then the full-on Emperor's theme from Return of the Jedi plays.
Admiral Rampart will face the consequences for his treachery.
And by the way, this is Ian McDiarmid returning to voice the character. And this, oh god, just all so perfect. Well done, Bad Batch, you're a very good Star Wars. Afterwards, Rex and Echo leave to go off and help clones, which has been foreshadowed earlier this season. Echo has been saying for a while that he wanted the Batch to join up with Rex.
Taking her off Kamino was the right thing to do, but there are others out there who need our help.
Now, I'm sure that we'll see him again, but I think it's a pretty good thing that he's leaving the show if the show's not going to bother to flesh out his character. Also, he made Tech kind of redundant on the team. Now, all of this is heartbreaking for Omega, who was finally getting to know Echo after he basically said that he didn't want her around in the first episode of this season.
That's not the kind of life this kid deserves. Our lives are like this because of Omega.
But of course, they made up in episode 2.
We made the right choice, Omega. I'd do it all again.
So Omega begins and ends the episode in her room, and the clones are finally going to be phased out by the Empire. The galaxy is soon to have millions of disaffected clone troopers running around, and what do you want to bet that some of them form rebellions, necessitating the need for more security, more safety, and a stronger military.
Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.